The palace had prepared for another day of pageantry, glittering corridors, rehearsed smiles, the dull rhythm of tradition that made time stand still. But history has a cruel way of intruding when it is least welcome. That morning, the air inside Buckingham carried an unease no protocol could disguise. Courtiers whispered in hushed tones, aides rushed with eyes downcast, and yet the official schedule carried on. Another ribbon cutting, another symbolic gesture, another performance of unity for a watching world. But the illusion broke when the press secretary appeared. He was pale, trembling, a ghost in a suit. He walked to the podium as though dragged by fate itself. Cameras blinked to life, millions of eyes watching. And with no preamble, no soothing words, he delivered the blow. King Charles's health had collapsed beyond recovery. The concealment, the silence, the carefully polished image, all lies. The truth had rotted beneath the crown for months, and now it spilled out in full view of the world. The broadcast turned into theatre of decay. Prince William stood rigid, his jaw clenched so tight the tendons pulsed against his skin. Catherine's eyes shimmered with tears she refused to shed, her composure bending but not breaking. Charles, frail and hollow, looked more like a shadow than a king. And then there was the absence that spoke louder than any words, Camilla. No camera found her. No statement named her. Not even a perfunctory mention of her role. She was missing from history's frame, her silence louder than the secretary's trembling voice. In that omission, suspicion was born. The world reacted in waves. First came shock, headlines screaming of abdication, death, and whispers of palace cover-ups. Then came frenzy, newsrooms dissecting every frame, commentators noting the absence of the Queen Consort, conspiracy theories igniting about her removal. And finally came recognition. This was not just an announcement of a king's weakness. It was a fracture in the monarchy itself. Inside the palace, the silence was suffocating. Staff moved like shadows, avoiding eye contact, as if acknowledging the truth might summon catastrophe. What had been whispered in corridors now rang across the globe: the king was broken, and the crown itself was splintering. The world was still reeling when the second strike landed. William and Catherine stepped forward, not as heirs waiting patiently in the wings, but as leaders claiming the stage. Their words cut through the fog of uncertainty with surgical precision. The nation was told of a sweeping plan, modernization, outreach, renewal. But it was not launched under Charles's faltering name. It was draped in the legacy of Diana. The Diana Initiative. The choice of name was no accident. It was invocation. Resurrection. A ghost called back to judge the living. The very woman the monarchy had once sought to silence was now its shield, its weapon, its future. Phones erupted across the globe. Headlines flared like fire. The initiative was hailed as revolutionary: new commitments to mental health, global outreach, community-driven leadership. But beneath the polished promises lay something darker. This was not tribute. This was takeover. And Camilla was nowhere to be found. Whispers spread that Camilla had resisted the Diana Initiative, fearing it would erase the fragile legitimacy she had clawed back over decades. Some said she even begged Charles to block it, but he was too weak, and William too determined. When Catherine read the speech she had written, the die was cast. Diana's memory was no longer grief, it was a weapon. The ripple was instant. Diana's image reappeared on palace walls, her charities reignited, and the media replayed her compassion as if she had never left. In her resurrection, Camilla began to fade. Her silence, absence, and exclusion weren't oversight, they were deliberate. William and Catherine had weaponized Diana to erase her. The monarchy was mutating in real time. Charles faltered, Camilla's influence evaporated, and at the center stood William and Catherine, deliberate and unflinching. It was no longer Charles and Camilla's monarchy, it was Diana's, reborn through her son and his wife. The world embraced it. For Charles, the initiative was more than policy, it was a mirror. Each word William spoke reflected the betrayal that defined his life. Frail and diminished, he watched the throne slip from his grasp. Courtiers saw him defer in meetings, Catherine's voice carried more weight than his. Even in private, he stopped shielding Camilla. Silence surrounded her, and it grew heavier each day. Charles found a bitter relief in surrender, but the legacy rising was not his, it was Diana's. The people saw it. The world saw it. And deep inside, he saw it too. Camilla's unraveling came not with scandal but erasure. Portraits removed, events reassigned, charities redirected. Staff dismissed. Even her sanctuary at Ray Mill House filled with whispers. In public, her absence became its own presence, empty chairs, photo calls without her name. She had survived by silence before, but this silence was a weapon against her. The Diana initiative had made her irrelevant, and in royal politics irrelevance is fatal. From mistress to consort, from despised to tolerated, all undone in a single stroke. Diana had returned, and Camilla was invisible. Then came the blow from across the ocean. From Montecito, Harry praised the initiative, speaking of duty and compassion. He never mentioned Camilla. He didn't need to. Omission was verdict enough. Newsrooms cut to old footage of Diana's embrace of the forgotten, her defiance in minefields, her tears before the cameras. Hashtags rose like ivy, Diana returns, legacy over loyalty. For the first time in years, Harry was not cast as the rebel, but as the witness. Inside the palace, aides abandoned their spin. Phones buzzed, transcripts piled like confessions, and eyes turned quietly toward Kensington. Charles read Harry's statement twice, no malice, no mercy, only clarity, a son aligning with his mother's shadow and his brother's strategy. Silence was all he had left. William didn't gloat, he didn't need to. His office moved like they had been waiting for this moment, turning applause into structure. Catherine answered not with words but with action, accelerating visits, launching calls, converting sympathy into clinics, helplines, and reach. The monarchy was shifting its gravity. Camilla felt the chill first. Donors asked for Catherine instead. A glossy cover with her face was dropped for a Diana retrospective. Her relevance was slipping, not in scandal but in silence. Harry's words hadn't created the wave, they exposed it. Loyalty itself drifted toward Kensington. And then came Anne. Blunt, unbending, the monarchy's iron spine. She tore through proposals with a pen, blocking mergers, defending causes, refusing optics over results. In meetings, Camilla's charts and charm dissolved under Anne's ledger of hard truths. If you want unity, start with results, she said, and the room understood, this was no request. By nightfall, the whispers spread. Camilla appeared wounded, immovable. And the truth mattered less than the story now racing through palace walls. A week later, the defiance changed shape. Letters arrived at certain offices with letterheads no one in PR should ever have to read, council retained, constitutional framework cited, a tender phrase about custom and propriety threaded through language that meant there are rules older than your rollout plan. Not a lawsuit, heaven forbid, but the kind of parchment that erects walls where people had imagined doors. Camilla's camp called Anne's resistance obstruction. Anne's circle called it stewardship. For her, the monarchy's survival was service, not optics. She didn't campaign, she convened. Trustees were summoned, numbers laid bare, and when the figures proved solid, her verdict was simple, then it stands. Anne fought quietly, through schedules and decisions, using momentum against itself. Whenever she and Camilla crossed paths, the air stiffened, two women trading silent blows with nods and restrained words. When Camilla asked for a joint appearance to quash rumors, Anne's reply cut soft but deep, do the work and the rumor collapses. Headlines framed it as sabotage, but the truth was simpler, endurance versus image. And measured victories in what endured once applause faded. Camilla, meanwhile, sat with a draft speech she no longer believed in, crossing out unity and replacing it with delivery. The work had already moved on without her. And in the background, history stirred. Long before crowns and crises, there had been Andrew Parker Bowles, a man of confidence and charm. Anne had loved him once, but the law made their union impossible. When he married Camilla instead, what had been denied became destiny. And that old fracture still haunted the present. Where the law barred Anne, it cleared the way for Camilla. She and Andrew fit the same rooms, social, fluent, inevitable. And bore the loss in silence, only to see her brother drawn into Camilla's orbit. What began as an affair became the monarchy's worst-kept secret, and eventually its fault line. Anne never spoke of it, but her inner ledger kept score. Loss became replacement, rejection became succession. Andrew's marriage to Camilla reshaped the stage she herself had been denied. Camilla endured, not by apology but by outlasting. Stones thrown became stepping stones, survival was her crown. In time, even the Queen yielded recognition. But Anne knew the difference between enduring and earning. Duty was her instinct, not her performance. The Diana Initiative exposed that contrast, turning old ghosts into instruments. Andrew's reappearance in coronation plans carried weight not of scandal, but of memory, his presence shifting seating charts and stirring fault lines that never healed. Camilla carried her role with discipline, every gesture rehearsed to precision. Yet no polish could disguise the shifting stage. Honors once has shrank, speeches reassigned, cameras redirected toward Catherine and Diana's legacy. Andrew's RSVP, filed and refiled, altered the atmosphere more than any headline could. By rehearsal's end, the message was clear. Camilla would wear the crown, but in a palace already bending toward others. What was meant as her triumph looked more like endurance rebranded, legitimacy deferred, and a throne that had quietly moved out from under her. Charles rehearsed his part like a man studying for an exam whose questions he had once written and now could not remember. He moved with the care of someone who has learned the body's betrayals by name. Between pages, he looked at nothing in particular, the look of a man listening for a sound he cannot prove he heard. When the script placed Camilla at his side, the room's temperature did not rise. When it placed Catherine in frame, it warmed by a degree the cameras would note and the nation would feel without understanding why. Press teams eked out the safest possible versions of inevitability, a glossy release here, a soft focus interview there. Catherine's segments, shot in daytime kitchens and sunlit clinics, landed with the force of something simple that took a long time to learn. Camilla's piece, meticulously produced, felt like a beautifully lit room whose window would not open. The nation prefers air. Anne's calendar did its own quiet work. She agreed to attend, obviously, she does not perform absence. But she added engagements in the days before and after that made a different argument, that monarchy endures in barns and laboratories and village halls where people who have never seen a crown do work that merits one. When asked about the streamlined royal family, she gave the same answer she had given before, thinly veiled skepticism made of experience. It wasn't a rebuke. It was an audit. The night before the ceremony, the city felt like a held breath. Hotels hummed with guests convinced they were part of a chapter, tents of cameras grew like a metal crop, the river pretended it had seen it all. In Ray Mill House, Camilla read a draft she had already rehearsed into muscle memory. She removed a line about unity, it rang hollow now, and replaced it with a smaller, sterner sentence about steadiness. She would not try to win the room. She would refuse to lose it. Morning arrived with the particular brightness that makes gilding look aggressive. The car door opened and Camilla became an object lesson in poise. Inside the abbey, Stone remembered other queens, kinder and crueler, more beloved and more feared. She walked the route that had been measured to the heartbeat, and the crowd performed its part, cheers calibrated by habit and curiosity. Phones rose in a forest, modern reverence looks like surveillance now. There were no disasters. No tripping veils, no misread lines, no microphones left open to catch a sigh that would live forever. The crown was placed. The oath was made. The music did exactly what centuries of composers designed it to do, it made emotion sound like destiny. And still, when history writes without permission, it chooses its ink. The images that traveled fastest were not of Camilla crowned. They were of Charles looking small beneath weight he had asked to carry for too long. They were of William steadying a moment no one else could have held. They were of Catherine, her face composed into a lesson in quiet sovereignty, and of children aligned in an aisle like a promise designed by committee and delivered by fate. Above all, they were of Diana, absent, present, uninvited, unavoidable, rising as context until context hardened into verdict. In the evening, after the car doors closed and the cameras went home to feed, the palace exhaled. Staff uncoupled from adrenaline and remembered to eat. The silver returned to boxes built by dead men with living hands. In a private room, Camilla sat very still and tried to hear the difference between applause and endurance. It is a subtle sound. Most people never learn it. Queens must. She had been crowned. The fact is not negotiable. But as the day settled into the soft gravity of aftermath, another truth threaded itself through the building like a draft: coronations make kings and queens. They do not make futures. Futures are forged in rooms with bad lighting and no cameras, where decisions are heavier than jewels and alliances hold longer than applause. In those rooms, the chairs had already been moved. She looked at her hands, at the indentation a scepter leaves if you grip it too tightly for too long. Survival had carried her further than anyone once allowed her to imagine. But survival is a bridge, not a country. On the far shore stood a monarchy that had discovered a new language for itself, and the translators were not taking notes from her anymore. Outside, the city came down from its pageant high. The river kept its counsel. Somewhere beyond the floodlights, a boy asked his mother why the lady on the screen did not look as happy as the crown on her head. His mother said something about nerves. The boy did not believe her. Children are expert readers of rooms they have never entered. The crown glittered in photographs that will outlive their subjects. But in the negatives, in the shadowed margins the camera does not intend to capture, a different picture formed, one of a reign already archivally beautiful and strategically finished. A crown can be gold. It can also be ash. The crown is never dropped. It slides. William did not storm the gates. He did not pound a table or make proclamations. He simply moved as if authority already belonged to him. Meetings that once reported into Buckingham began detouring to Kensington. Foreign dignitaries asked whether an audience with the king could be paired with time beside the Prince and Princess of Wales, because it was in those rooms, not the throne room, where influence now lingered. It was not rebellion. It was momentum. Charles's reign, years in waiting, was marked less by what he accomplished than by what he yielded. To his son. To his daughter-in-law. To the ghost of the woman he once betrayed. Even his staff began describing him in the past tense: His Majesty prefers becoming His Majesty preferred. A present king spoken of as if he had already receded into history. Catherine, meanwhile, did not ascend. She anchored. Her causes, mental health, early childhood, grief, were not ceremonial banners but living arteries of empathy. Every time she stood before a camera, the echoes were unmistakable, the cadence of Diana, yes, but fused with her own unshakable steel. She became the monarchy's soul not by inheritance but by performance. Not by blood, but by trust. And the public responded. Crowds that once greeted Charles with polite applause surged forward for William and Catherine, phones raised like torches. Headlines began to describe them not as heirs, but as the monarchy's present tense. The people's couple. The heirs apparent in all but name. Camilla? She faded. Her diary shrank. Her patronages withered. Photographers stopped asking where is the Queen Consort. Because the answer no longer mattered. Her allies quietly defected, realigning themselves to William's court. Even her staff began to mutter the cruelest word in royal corridors: irrelevant. And so the monarchy shifted its weight. The crown gleamed on Charles's head, but the power pulsed elsewhere. The court had moved, not in law, but in loyalty. Not in ritual, but in reality. The new order was not waiting. It was here. And so the story resolves itself in silence. A frail king yielding ground he can no longer defend. A queen consort erased by omission more lethal than scandal. An iron princess sharpening her defiance against the woman she never forgave. Two heirs stepping not into the throne's shadow, but into its light, carrying the ghost of Diana as their standard. This is not merely a chapter of royal drama. It is a mutation of the crown itself. The monarchy has not fallen. But it has changed, and in that change lies its darkest reckoning yet. And the question that remains is the one the palace cannot answer. If Diana's ghost now rules the monarchy more than any living queen, What future is left for the House of Windsor? If you believe the crown has already shifted, if you see William and Catherine not as heirs but as rulers in waiting, then stay with us. Like this video, subscribe, and ring the bell, because the darkest secrets of the monarchy are only beginning to surface. And what comes next may shake the throne to its core.